In this video, I'm continuing my exploration of the traditional within the Church of England. I'm exploring the idea that using the traditional old language and old church buildings and old symbolism from within the Church of England, or in fact from any church tradition, that this approach can be understood as postmodern. Now, the starting point for this exploration in this video is I want to start with the New Atheists, that group, Dawkins, Harris, Hitchens, Dennett, and I want to see them as a symptom of the death of modernism. Now, I'm certainly not claiming this as an original insight. If anyone wants to claim that the entire content of this video is derivative, I'd probably broadly agree with them. It's a synthesis. That's what I'm doing here. I'm processing this information. I'm thinking as I'm going along here, and I'm processing this information in my own exploration of possibilities of working with the traditional Church of England to speak to people who are aware of a profound lack of meaning in their lives. Now, chronologically, this video is the third in the series. But as they're really just sort of analysing the context, they can be watched in any order. Now, the thesis that the rise of the New Atheists was a defence of modernism as it became obvious that it was in serious decline, that makes sense to me as I observe cultural trends. You really only have to defend something if you think it's under threat. Dawkins, Harris et al. They recognise that the Enlightenment scientific project, and I'll use the shorthand for this of just, I'll call it modernism, and modernism was losing ground. And probably the clearest statement of this, which really created that strand of aggressive atheism labelled as the New Atheists, it was the Al-Qaeda attack on the Pentagon and World Trade Center in 2001. These New Atheists focused their attack primarily on American fundamentalist Christians. But I see this really as that wasn't really their target. They were merely a proxy for those they wanted to attack, which was modern fundamentalist Islam. In this modernist narrative, all this religion, this superstition, was supposed to be dying out in the face of science. Now, we've got science in inverted commas there if I was writing this. Within the modernist mindset, science is a powerful symbol word which is very much understood as it's the exact opposite of religion. That's what the word means in that context. And the narrative here says that science has defeated religion, and here's religion in these attacks striking at the heart of Western civilization. This attack appeared to be a medieval ideology taking on this enlightened 21st century Western scientific culture. Now, I want to return to this idea of it being a medieval ideology shortly, as that's one of the major focus of this video. But a bit of reflection first on these New Atheists. And let's explore what I see as a major problem in the New Atheist project. I mean a problem in that I fairly obviously disagree with them. I mean a problem with the project, even looked at it from within. Let's look at Dawkins' The God Delusion. That's very relevant for me as a school chaplain. Strikes me as a book which has a target audience really of the smart 13-year-old, probably male. Now I've got no shortage of smart 13-year-old male types in the schools in which I work, and as chaplain therefore I bump up against the God Delusion from them. It's just constant. And as I look at the God Delusion, and as I look at what these boys are reading and what they feed to me and what they see as their challenge of my Christianity, all the time what you get from Dawkins, it's a debunking, it's a getting rid, it's a throwing away. And here's the major problem with that New Atheists project. It puts nothing in the place of the religion it so desperately wants to eliminate. Now let's look at that Humanist UK Atheist Bus Project 2008. Now this showed a total failure to understand religion. The major premise of the campaign was that belief in God generates worry. Now, it's explicit within the slogan, there is probably no God, now stop worrying and enjoy your life. Here's a major problem. There's absolutely no evidence that that is the case. This is coming from these people who want a scientific approach. There is plenty of evidence, plenty of empirical evidence. Survey after survey identifies that those with a religious faith which is deeply embedded within a religious tradition and community enjoy better mental health than average. I don't know if you've ever looked at the attempts made by some of these Enlightenment Project modernists and the attempts to replace traditional religions. Now, essentially, this has been done in the West, so it's replacing Christianity with some modernist-based system. Now, a very famous example, an early one, was turning Notre Dame into a temple of reason after Catholicism was banned in France in 1792. It didn't last. Notre Dame was returned to a Christian cathedral. Now, there are groups, there are meet-up groups which meet to discuss Dawkins' ideas, and there's an element whereby that's probably some sort of replacement of church. There's people who actually produce sort of hymns to science. But there's absolutely no indication at all that this is a growing number. It's just this tiny little fringe element for whom it presumably gives some support, but no evidence it's having traction widely in society. The primary reason for this is that the New Atheists are essentially negative. They are against. This is the A in atheist. Now, it's noticeable that Sam Harris has moved from this position to offering a meditation app. He's got this interest in psychedelics. I've not got time here to explore whether this is a real shift in his position and how much that might open up potential for meeting of minds with the religious position. But I think it's significant that personally I'm a frequent listener of Sam Harris on YouTube. I don't listen to Sam Harris because I'm looking to pick holes. I listen to Sam Harris because I think he's got I value his insights. He's got a lot of wisdom in what he says. Now, I want to contrast that with that older generation, the Dawkins and Dennett, who I find just insufferably shallow and permanently in straw man territory when they are dealing with religion. But back to the main thrust of that atheist project at the beginning of the 21st century, epitomised by the God delusion, that was 2006, and then the output of that group labelled as the Four Horsemen of Atheism. So that's Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, Daniel Dennett and Sam Harris. They wanted to debunk religion as irrational, and here's their major problem: they had nothing to put in its place. So this is why it was necessary then to generate what I've heard, I think, appropriately called the Atheism Plus strand within that, which is in fact the social justice movement. The pure negativity of Richard Dawkins et al., simply ripping everything down, did absolutely nothing to give people a reason to get up in the morning. When the traditional religions were removed by the new atheists, along with them went the moral framework and meaning they provided. Now, one strand of atheism, therefore, replaced the meaning generated from traditional mainstream religions with another set of beliefs to give purpose to life, something to believe in, something to live for. Now, it's pretty obvious that as you look at this Atheism Plus movement, and looking very particularly at something like Extinction Rebellion, Black Lives Matter, at the passion with which some of them engage in their battles around intersectionality and cancelling people. There's no doubt at all that this strand provides profound meaning for those involved with them. And there also, as you look at these, there's plenty of this. This is full of a ritual. It's not difficult to understand this as, in fact, a religion without an explicit belief in a transcendent God of the traditional Western religions which it replaced. And this fits very well with that quotation, which is probably G.K. Chesterton, where men choose not to believe in God, they do not thereafter believe in nothing. They then become capable of believing in anything. So let's now move to the meaning crisis as the route to where I want to go in the exploration of the traditional in the Church of England as an answer to it. Now, for anyone who wants to explore the meaning crisis in depth, I think there's probably no better way of getting into this than the lecture series from John Vervaeke on YouTube, Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. I'll put a link in the notes to that. The meaning crisis is a result of the increasingly obvious failure of the Enlightenment project. I've got to qualify that because, yes, the Enlightenment project has delivered some amazing results, many of which I enjoy enormously. And in fact, it's the results of the Enlightenment project, which means I'm sitting in front of a webcam and producing this YouTube video. So yes, it's delivered results. I like antibiotics. That's my favourite one in terms of liking scientific results. The Enlightenment project, that scientific revolution, it's extended our lives to the point where, well, in UK we can realistically expect decent health and active life into our mid-80s. We've got wealth which would be undreamed of even 100 years ago. But here's the crunch. Amidst all that wealth and longevity, there's every indication that people in the West are deeply unhappy. I picked up some great insights into modern Western life. Probably this relates primarily to middle class. The middle class version of that is from a Rebel Wisdom podcast, and it was called Indigenous Thinking for Troubled Times, with an Australian called Tyson Yunkaporta. And his analysis, brilliant, absolutely spot on. He says we no longer have family, community and land. We have the economy and the state. They'll provide for you, in one sense, everything that family, community and land used to provide. But here's the other side of that deal, and this is where I think it's just amazing how he's put this, just wonderful. You have to sell the economy and the state a third of your life. There's another third spent sleeping, and a sizable chunk of the remaining third that's supposedly yours, you're going to spend this commuting, general life maintenance, admin tasks, paying your bills, etc. And of course in this, you're not getting any exercise, commuting and then working in an office. So you're going to have to set aside, probably quite a few hours a week for that. And so the economy and the state will provide for you these indoor spaces where you can lift heavy things that don't need lifting, pedal on a bike that goes nowhere, run even though nothing's chasing you. You're not chasing anything and you're not trying to get somewhere quickly. You're going to do all these pointless tasks and you're going to do them over and over and over and over again until you die. And that is counted as progress. Love that analysis from that someone, an Indigenous thinker. And continuing with that theme, I look at the old boys from the schools in which I've been chaplain. These are high achievers, and I look at their LinkedIn with loads of them, and you look at their LinkedIn profiles, And I read the job title, and as far as I'm concerned, it gives me absolutely no clue at all to what they actually do when they turn up at work each day. They look to me, these job titles, as if these are people who are no more than a highly paid cog in the financial machine, who facilitate, how do you put it, I don't know, the moving around the world of computer ones and zeros. In other words, it's just, you know, on-offs of an electric current on a microchip, without any of this ever meaningfully touching anything solid like a, you know, bag of potatoes or a brick or a hammer. And yet these guys are highly paid, there's no question about that. But do they deep down have an awareness of the ephemeral nature of their work, to which they commit huge numbers of hours each week? I cannot imagine for a second that a plumber has any such concerns. He knows at every level of his being that what he's doing is very important. Can the young high flyer in the city sit on his sofa in the evening with the same deep level of knowledge that he's taking his responsible place in the community? Now, postmodernism in its standard university form is a reaction against modernism, a recognition that the Enlightenment scientific project, basing everything on human reason, it's failed. It's given us science, no question about that, it's given us antibiotics, but it has stripped meaning from our lives. But just like the modernist response to religion, this postmodernist project, it gives nothing positive. Postmodernism gives nothing but skepticism, an ironic, cynical, detached view of oneself and everything else. Nothing is genuine, everything is about power. Every hero has to be deconstructed to focus entirely on their feet of clay, which then must be made to eclipse anything positive they may have achieved in their lives. Postmodernism really gives nothing that is positive. And here's the problem. We as Homo sapiens simply cannot live a meaningful life if we have nothing but skepticism, cynicism and ironic detachment. And it's very questionable whether Homo sapiens can actually continue living without having any meaning in their lives. And into this void steps Al-Qaeda. Now, this is usually presented as an attempt to grasp meaning from an archaic past, trying to recover a medieval ideology and apply it today. Now, superficial level, that's clearly true. But what I want to explore here is a more nuanced approach. And I think this analysis misses the fact that the rise of modern Islamic fundamentalism was not and is not simply a reaching back to archaic times and grabbing back at ancient things to bring it into the present. I think it's a bit more subtle than that. And I think it's better understood as a reappropriation of that archaic past to speak to the meaning crisis of today. And this process is in many ways deeply postmodern. A major reason that Al-Qaeda is probably not strictly a return to an ancient ideology is that that is probably impossible. We probably simply cannot undo the Enlightenment influence on the way we engage with the world. We cannot return to inhabiting the ancient world. We simply think differently. We see the world differently. And there's, as far as I can see, no going back. So what we see in Al-Qaeda is probably better understood as a postmodern traditionalism. Now, having picked up that analysis about Al-Qaeda and resurgent, what's usually described as fundamentalist Islam, let's explore my desire to work with the traditional in the Church of England. Well, actually, I'm happy to draw from Christianity generally, the traditional, the ancient within the entire Christian tradition, and to look at how we can work with that as a response to the meaning crisis, to speak meaning into what I see as the empty lives of many people. Okay, a simple grabbing of the ancient and dragging it into the 21st century is almost certainly not going to work. It's just not going to speak to people today. In fact, what we bring from centuries ago is actually not the same as it was then. Well, it cannot be. It doesn't travel through time in that way. We're just not the same people as in 1662. That's the date of the what's called Book of Common Prayer. It's the sort of very, very important prayer book text of the Church of England. Or even less the people of 1220, a relevant date for me because that's when Salisbury Cathedral, the new Salisbury Cathedral, was founded, and I work in the cathedral close, so I spend plenty of time soaking in the traditions of that building and what happens within it. And we are less close again to the Church Fathers and then to the roots of that Orthodox tradition that the likes of Jonathan Pajot draws on in his YouTube series, The Symbolic World. Now, some valuable insights I picked up from Paul VanderKlay when in one of his YouTube videos. I'll stick links to these characters in case you've never heard of them. I'll put links in the notes. So this insight I picked up from Paul VanderKlay. He was talking about this sort of using the ancient, and he made reference to some of his biblical commentaries, and he showed this IVP series. I've not bought any commentaries for quite a long time, and this was completely new to me. And this IVP series is called Ancient Christian Commentary on Scripture. It's a series of them. And it can be seen, and probably best understood actually, as a postmodern commentary. And probably, and this is a word I want to use, I like this word and I'm going to work with it, neo-traditional. And its approach essentially is stuff modernity. Modernity was the wrong path. It didn't work. It's not delivered the goods. Let's go back to the Church Fathers and try to appropriate something from the Scriptures from them. Now, it's postmodern in the sense that the editors and authors of the series look at modernity and think, well, you may have delivered antibiotics, but you've also ripped the heart out of human life. We need something different. Modernity has failed on the meaning front. And actually, you know what? Meaning might be more important than the things that modernity has delivered. So we need to move on from that Enlightenment modernist ideology because it's failed in many ways. And so hence this is a postmodern approach. But there's also the acknowledgement that there's just simply too much within modernity that we cannot get away from. We cannot be ancients. There's no going back. Hence, if we're looking at recovery of the traditional, well, that's fairly obviously what I'm keep going on about in these videos. That's what I'm wrestling with. So therefore, the project I'm exploring, I'm going to need to put a neo in front of that word traditional. Because we almost certainly can't go back. Well, let's go back even to 1955, when as a christening present, I was bought by my godfather a combined edition, Book of Common Prayer and Hymns Ancient and Modern. Now, for about 100 years, from 1861, when Hymns Ancient and Modern was first published, this combined edition was the bedrock of the Church of England. That era has now ended. Both Hymns Ancient and Modern and Book of Common Prayer have gone from the mainstream. The church that people are confronted by now is not the church of 1955. The huge range of styles of worship and ways of being church now is just radically different. And even if, and this is the important bit, even if we end up using Book of Common Prayer and Hymns Ancient and Modern, we are not using it now, and we are not speaking to people now and drawing in the same people now as we would in 1955. And one very important aspect here, at a very basic level, to do that now, Book of Common Prayer, Hymns Ancient and Modern, we are making a choice. In 1955, essentially, that's all there was. In the early 21st century, theologians like Rudolf Bultmann attempted to save Christianity from the acids of modernity. Bultmann's demythologizing project was an attempt to produce Christianity for modern people, people who's a famous quote from Bultmann, which explains the starting point for his project. And he said, "We cannot use electric lights and radios and in the event of illness avail ourselves of modern medical and clinical means and at the same time believe in the spirit and wonder world of the New Testament." Now, Bultmann gave the kiss of death to those churches who adopted his approach. That modernist interpretation of Christianity, it was taken on very strongly, taken on board very strongly in England by the Methodists, United Reformed Church, and it's proved to be completely and utterly empty in addressing the felt needs of people of the late 20th and early 21st centuries, and those denominations have just experienced precipitous decline. And it's those churches which have retained or rediscovered some major mythological and, for want of a better term, supernatural elements which have thrived, those very elements that Bultmann said we could no longer work with. So my project is to reinterpret the ancient for today. So if I can just be permitted a digression into motorcycling. I usually don't bring bikes into these church strands, but I think this one works here. Nice motorcycling analogy. Now, there are some companies today that are making motorbikes which have got a very clear straight line heritage back to the 1930s. There's two of them, Royal Enfield and Motor Guzzi, very obvious examples. Now, here's the important bit. These are very far from an actual 1930s bike. Now I know that because I own a 1939 Velocette. It's a 1930s bike. It is, that's what it is, 1939. It's unmodernized. It is completely unfit for purpose on modern roads. Love the bike's great, hobby bike, vintage bike, love it, but it's unfit for purpose as a general bike for modern roads. Now, I've also got 2009 Motor Guzzi. Now, that's very much a 1930s bike in so many ways if you compared it to a 2009 Japanese bike. But here's the important bit of this analogy. That 2009 Guzzi is thoroughly fit for purpose on modern roads. So after some more rather rambling excursions into the general cultural background of the UK in the 20s, it's a reminder of the question that's driving this. How can we draw on the long traditions of the Church of England, reaching back to 1662 prayer book and, well, even before that? Church of England is not so much a Protestant church as an English interpretation of the Western Christian tradition present in England since what? Well, certainly since the 7th century. And here's something I've got to keep reminding myself and also stating for critics, that I'm not just being nostalgic. Come back to the bikes again. Nostalgic is wanting bikes like that 1939 Velocette. No, that's not what I want. I'm not looking for a return to that idyllic period of the Church of England of 1955 when I was born. And I could be bought that combined Book of Common Prayer and hymns ancient and modern. That's just pure nostalgia. It's very importantly, I mean, it just wasn't an idyllic time. And I'm pretty convinced that the services to be found in most parish churches in 1950 just wouldn't speak to 21st century people. Questionable, of course, whether it spoke to people in 1955 either. So I'm not interested in a simple return. I'm not interested in nostalgia. Nostalgia's empty, does very little. But nor do I think a modernisation process is the best way of understanding this either. Modernisation in the sense of applying modernism, trying to bring Christianity in line with the Enlightenment project. That's the Bultmann approach. This was very much the route taken by the Church of England over the past 50 years in some of its sections, and also mentioned the Methodists and URCs. Now, the more that Bultmann modernisation process has been applied, the more decline we have seen. Now, I also think there's plenty to learn from what I'll call the Holy Trinity Brompton strand of the Church of England, because they have, no doubt about it, they've totally rejected Bultmann's major premise. We cannot use electric lights and radios in the event of illness, avail ourselves of modern medical and clinical means, and at the same time believe in the spirit and wonder world of the New Testament. Well, those Holy Trinity Brompton Anglicans have looked at contemporary Britain and said, you know what, Bultmann was wrong. Boy, was he wrong, because you know what, 21st century people, they really, really can identify and work with that spirit and wonder world of the New Testament. And the Holy Trinity Brompton strand says, and we're going to engage with it and present a modern form of Church of England which really focuses on that. And here's the important bit, that Holy Trinity Brompton strand within the Church of England, I mean, it is thriving and growing and producing vibrant churches in which lives are changed. But here's the important bit here, that's not a tradition for everyone, and it's those people who don't fit within that HTB strand that I am very much interested in speaking to. So this is where I'm exploring. The Enlightenment project, modernism, has clearly failed to deliver meaning along with all its medical technological advances. The aggressive new atheist approach has clearly delivered nothing in terms of meaning. The atheist plus strand of social justice movement, well, that's clearly delivering meaning by the bucket load to those involved, and I'm going to say an important rider here, in the short term. But I also suggest it's taking us on a very dangerous path away from liberal democracy, and it's also taking us in a direction which will ultimately fail. It's got so many internal flaws within it, internal tensions, that it's that intersectionality model that the atheist plus social justice strand takes, that intersectional model, it implodes in ever smaller victim groups fighting each other to be the most oppressed group and claim the most power because of their oppression. So while acknowledging there's too much within modernity that we just cannot get away from, we simply cannot be ancients, there's no going back. So the project then I'm exploring requires that neo in front of traditional. I'm convinced that there should be ways of being church which fit with that concept of the neo-traditional, a reinterpretation of the ancient to produce a Christianity which has profound respect for its traditions, works within very traditional sort of models, those traditions going back through the centuries of the Western tradition, including the Reformation, back to the Church Fathers, and then rooted ultimately back in the Bible. And also ways of being church, following that, what I'm calling neo-traditional, which speaks to people today in the UK and enables them to meet with God and so have a sense of meaning in their lives.